Rain hammered against the old tin roof, the kind of rain that seeps into the bones. Inside the dimly lit room, Emily sat hunched in the corner. Her little boy, Noah, barely 2 years old, lay fast asleep on a thin blanket beside her. The wooden floor beneath them was cold and hard, but it was all they had. Emily carefully tucked the edges of Noah's blanket under his tiny frame, trying to keep the draft from reaching him. She didn't care that her own legs had gone numb hours ago. All that mattered was keeping him warm. Once upon a time, she had a bed, a small, cozy apartment, a husband who promised her forever. But forever had lasted only until life became inconvenient for him. When Noah was just 3 months old, Emily's husband walked out. No warning, no money left behind, just a note that read, "I'm not cut out for this." Since then, Emily had been on her own. She worked part-time at a cafe for minimum wage, but the rent had become impossible. A month ago, she was evicted. Since then, she'd been bouncing between temporary shelters and the kindness of strangers. Tonight, however, the shelter was full. The volunteer had looked at her with sympathy but shook her head. No beds left. "I'm so sorry." Emily forced a smile, nodded, and left without crying. She had learned that tears didn't make food appear or doors magically open. They found an abandoned storage space at the back of the building where she worked. It smelled faintly of dust and paint, but at least it was dry. Emily spread out their one thin blanket and settled Noah down. The sound of the rain was almost hypnotic. Emily leaned against the wall, staring at the ceiling, her mind heavy with worry. She didn't notice the shadow moving outside the glass door. She didn't know that someone had been watching. Miles Carter stood there, a tall man in a tailored black coat, his umbrella dripping. He had come to the cafe after hours to pick up some documents his assistant had left behind. But when he saw the dim light in the back room, curiosity made him look closer. Through the glass, he saw her, a young woman curled protectively around a sleeping child on the floor. Her hair was damp, her clothes worn, but there was something in her eyes, an unshakable determination. Miles's chest tightened. He had seen poverty before, but never like this. Something about the scene rooted him to the spot. For a long moment, he just stood there, the rain dripping from his umbrella, watching them. And then, without fully knowing why, Miles reached for the door handle. In 1 minute, everything in both their lives was about to change. By the time Nicholas stepped inside the shelter, the morning air had turned heavy with the smell of damp blankets and old wood. He didn't belong there. Anyone could see it. His tailored navy suit, polished shoes, and the faint scent of expensive cologne set him apart from the crowd of weary faces. But Nicholas wasn't here for appearances. He was here because of a promise. The shelter manager, Mrs. Parker, hurried toward him with a warm but surprised smile. "Mr. Hale, we didn't expect you until next week. I had a change in schedule," Nicholas replied softly, scanning the dimly lit room. Rows of metal beds lined the walls, but many were already occupied. The cold had driven more people inside. And then he saw her. She was in the far corner, sitting on the floor near an empty cot. A worn baby blanket lay over her knees, and in her arms a tiny child slept soundly. Her dark hair was tied back in a loose braid, strands falling over her face. She wasn't crying, but there was a stillness in her expression, a quiet that spoke of exhaustion, far deeper than sleep could fix. Nicholas didn't know why his gaze stayed on her. Maybe it was the way she sat protectively curled around the baby, as if the world could break her in half, but she'd still keep the child safe. Maybe it was because she hadn't even noticed him, while everyone else in the room had. Mrs. Parker noticed where he was looking, and her smile faltered. "That's Clara," she said quietly. "She's been here 2 nights. Lost her apartment last week. Landlord didn't give her time to move her things. The baby's about a year old. No family nearby." Nicholas's brows knit together. "Why is she on the floor?" "She says she sleeps better that way. Doesn't want to disturb the others. And she doesn't like putting the baby on the cot. Afraid he'll roll off." Nicholas's eyes lingered. Clara's jacket was thin, the kind given by donation bins. Her shoes, a size too big, were worn nearly to the sole. She wasn't begging anyone for help. She wasn't even looking up to see if help was coming. Something in his chest shifted. He walked toward her, footsteps echoing faintly. Clara looked up, startled, her eyes wide and cautious. "I'm sorry," he said gently, crouching down so he was level with her. You look like you haven't had a real bed in a while. Clara hesitated, clutching her child closer. We're fine, she murmured. Nicholas glanced at the baby, at the pale cheek pressed against her shoulder. That's good, he said softly, but I think you deserve better than fine. For a long second, they just looked at each other, her guarded, him unreadable. And then, without quite knowing why, Nicholas heard himself say, Come with me, just for today. Her fingers tightened on the blanket. Why? Nicholas gave a small, quiet smile. Because 1 minute can change everything. Isla awoke to the faint sound of voices. Her eyes fluttered open, the dim morning light spilling into the small storage room, where she had slept. Her body ached from the cold. Hard floor, and the baby stirred beside her, letting out a soft whimper. She gently rocked him, whispering, Shh, it's okay, baby. But before she could get up, the door creaked open. Standing there was him. The man from last night, the billionaire she had only glimpsed, through the cafe's window while she worked. Mr. Adrian Cole. He was dressed sharply as always, but there was something softer in his eyes this morning. His gaze swept the small room, lingering on the worn blanket, the half-empty baby bottle, and the tiny bundle in Isla's arms. You stayed here all night? He asked quietly. Isla froze, unsure how to answer. She didn't want to admit she had nowhere else to go. Instead, she mumbled, I didn't want to disturb anyone, and the floor was fine. Adrian stepped into the room, the air around him carrying the faint scent of expensive cologne. He knelt down, not something Isla expected from a man like him, and looked at the baby. What's his name? He asked. Eli, Isla replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Adrian studied her for a moment, as though trying to piece together her story without asking too much. Then, to Isla's surprise, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded blanket. Thick, soft, and clearly expensive. Here, he said, placing it over Eli. No child should have to sleep in the cold. Isla's throat tightened. She opened her mouth to thank him, but no words came out. Instead, she simply nodded, clutching the blanket like it was the most valuable gift she'd ever received. Adrian straightened up. I'll be in the cafe for a while, he said. Come find me when you're ready to talk. And with that, he left. Isla stared after him, her mind racing. Why would a man like him, wealthy, important, care about someone like her? She didn't know it yet, but that small act of kindness was only the beginning. Because in the next few hours, her entire life would start to change. Elena's hands trembled as she poured a cup of coffee into the chipped mug. She was used to customers ignoring her, but this man's eyes seemed to see through her. She set the cup on the counter, avoiding his gaze. That'll be $3, she murmured. The man reached into his wallet, but instead of handing her the exact amount, he slid a crisp $100 bill across the counter. Her heart skipped. This had to be a mistake. Sir, I think you... Keep the change, he interrupted gently, his voice calm but deliberate. Consider it an investment. An investment? In what? Her? She swallowed hard, unsure what to say. No one had ever handed her that much money for doing anything, let alone pouring a cup of coffee. I can't accept this, she whispered. But he didn't take it back. Instead, he leaned slightly closer. You look like someone who's been carrying the weight of the world alone. Am I right? Her lips parted, but no words came out. Was she that transparent? He glanced toward the corner of the diner where her little boy, Noah, was curled up in the booth, fast asleep with his small backpack clutched to his chest. The billionaire's eyes softened. You should get him a warm bed tonight, he said quietly. Her chest tightened. He didn't know that Noah hadn't had a bed in weeks. They'd been living out of an old sedan parked 2 blocks away, too afraid to draw attention. Why are you doing this? She finally asked. The man gave a faint smile. Because I've been where you are, and someone once gave me a reason to believe in people again. His words sank into her like sunlight on frozen skin. Still, her instincts screamed to be careful. Kindness this big usually came with strings attached. I appreciate it, she said cautiously, but we'll be fine. Even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. He didn't push further. Instead, he sipped his coffee, glancing at her name tag. Elena, he said slowly, as though committing it to memory. If you ever decide you're ready for a change, I can help. Before she could respond, a voice from the kitchen shouted her name. The man slid a sleek black business card across the counter. Just a name, Adrian Cole, and a phone number in silver lettering. He stood, nodded politely, and walked out, leaving the faint scent of expensive cologne behind. The door chimed as it closed. Elena stared at the card for a long moment. The name felt familiar, but she couldn't place it. When she glanced out the window, she caught sight of a sleek black car pulling away. She didn't know it yet, but this man was about to turn her entire life upside down. The city outside was loud, but inside the store it felt like the world had gone quiet. Liam knelt on one knee, trying to catch the little girl's gaze. She clutched her stuffed bear tightly, peeking out from behind her mother's leg. "She's beautiful," Liam said softly, his tone warmer than Sophie expected. "What's her name?" "Emily," Sophie replied, hesitating. Her voice was shy, almost protective, as though speaking. Too much would make this moment vanish. Liam reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a folded blanket. It wasn't from the store. It was his own. Sophie realized he must have been carrying it for a reason. "This kept me warm once," he said, holding it out. "It's not much, but I think she needs it more." Sophie's hands shook slightly as she took it. The blanket was heavy, soft, and smelled faintly of cedarwood. Why would you do that for us?" Sophie asked, her voice almost a whisper. Liam looked her straight in the eyes. "Because I know what it's like to be cold, hungry, and invisible." Sophie blinked, taken aback. She'd assumed he had always been wealthy, untouchable. "Not many people care," she murmured. "That's the problem," he replied, his jaw tightening. "But maybe today that changes." Without another word, Liam turned to the cashier. "I'm buying everything she needs. Groceries, clothes, shoes, put it all on my account." The cashier's eyes widened. Sophie's did too. "You don't have to." I know I don't," Liam interrupted, gently but firmly. "But I want to." For the first time in months, Sophie felt her chest tighten, not from fear, but from the strange ache of hope trying to return. Emily let go of her mother's leg and took the blanket from Sophie's hands, wrapping herself in it like a cocoon. Liam smiled faintly. "Looks like she likes it." Sophie swallowed hard. She didn't know why this man cared. She didn't know what would happen next, but something deep inside told her this meeting was not an accident. It was the beginning of something neither of them could yet imagine. The next morning, Clara woke to the soft rustle of footsteps. Her eyes blinked open, adjusting to the sunlight spilling through the wide windows of the penthouse. She sat up quickly, disoriented. The plush bed she had been placed in last night felt like a cloud beneath her. It was worlds away from the cold floor she had been sleeping on just 24 hours ago. She looked around for Mia. Her heart skipped a beat when she didn't see the small bundle next to her. Before panic could consume her, the door creaked open. In walked Mr. Hayes, holding Mia in his arms. The billionaire, always in perfectly tailored suits, was dressed casually today. His hair was slightly messy, and there was a warmth in his expression she hadn't noticed before. "She's been keeping me company," he said softly, smiling down at the baby. "She's an angel." Clara's throat tightened. No one had ever taken this much interest in her child, not even her own family. "Thank you for everything," she whispered. Her voice cracked. She hated how vulnerable she sounded. He set Mia down gently on the bed, then pulled a chair closer. "I want to know your story," he said simply. Clara hesitated. Her fingers twisted the bedsheet. "It's not a very nice one." "I've lived long enough to know," he said, "that the worst stories often belong to the strongest people." And so, she told him, about losing her parents, about marrying too young, about her husband leaving her when she got pregnant, about the small apartment she could barely afford, and how the landlord had thrown her out 2 weeks ago, and how, since then, she had been working at the cafe all day, sleeping on the floor at night with Mia wrapped in her arms. When she finished, there was a heavy silence. Hayes leaned back in his chair, looking out the window for a moment. Then he turned back to her. "I'm not in the habit of helping strangers," he said slowly. "But I think this is different." Clara frowned. "What do you mean?" He reached into his pocket and slid a small envelope across the table. Inside was a set of keys and a bank card. "That's for a new apartment," he said. "Fully paid for a year. And the card is for expenses. You don't owe me anything. But I expect one thing from you." Her hands shook as she held the envelope. "What?" "Promise me," he said, looking directly into her eyes, "that you'll never let life convince you that you and your daughter are worth less than the world." Tears blurred her vision. She didn't know why he was doing this or why it felt like more than just charity. But one thing was certain. Her life had just taken a turn she could never have imagined. Sophie sat in the doctor's office, her hands trembling in her lap. Emma was in the play corner, stacking wooden blocks and humming to herself. The billionaire Ethan stood beside her, one hand resting gently on the back of her chair. It was a small gesture, but Sophie felt the warmth of it. The doctor, a kind woman, with silver hair, looked up from the papers. "She's healthy," she smiled. "But there's something we should discuss." Sophie's stomach tightened. "What is it?" The doctor hesitated, glancing between Sophie and Ethan. "Emma is slightly underweight, and it's clear she hasn't been getting enough protein for her age." Sophie's cheeks burned. She wanted to sink into the floor. I do my best," she stammered. "Sometimes it's just hard." Ethan's voice was gentle, but firm. "It's not your fault. It's the circumstances. And that ends today." Sophie blinked. "What do you mean?" Ethan turned to the doctor. "Give us a complete nutrition plan. Whatever supplements she needs, we'll have them delivered weekly." "We?" Sophie whispered, confused, her eyes searching his face. "Yes," Ethan said, like it was the most obvious thing. "You're not doing this alone anymore." The words hit Sophie, like sunlight breaking through clouds. She wanted to believe him, but life had taught her that good things rarely lasted. On the way back, Ethan made a sudden turn. "Where are we going?" Sophie asked. "You'll see." They pulled up to a small but cozy store. Inside, racks of tiny dresses, shoes, and coats spilled color into the air. "This is for Emma," Ethan said simply. Sophie's heart pounded. "Ethan, you've done enough!" "I can't let you—" He cut her off. "You can, and you will, because she deserves it." Emma ran from rack to rack, her laughter echoing through the empty store. She clutched a yellow dress, holding it to her chest. "Mommy, can I?" Sophie swallowed the lump in her throat. "Yes, baby." Ethan smiled faintly. "Get whatever she wants. And you too, Sophie." Her head snapped up. "Me?" "Yes. You can't pour from an empty cup. If you're not cared for, you can't care for her." Sophie turned away quickly, pretending to check the price tags, hiding the tears in her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt like someone was standing in her corner. But deep down, a tiny voice whispered, "Why is he doing this? And what happens when he decides to walk away?" The next morning, Emily woke up to the smell of warm bread. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she forgot where she was. The room was soft and sunlit, and the faint sound of laughter drifted in from somewhere. Then it hit her. This was Daniel's house. She sat up quickly, checking on Lily, who was still curled under the blanket, cheeks flushed from a peaceful sleep. When Emily stepped into the kitchen, Daniel was already there, setting a plate of toast and eggs on the table. He looked different this morning, lighter, like a man who had made up his mind about something important. "You don't have to do all this," Emily murmured, though her voice lacked conviction. "I want to," Daniel said simply, sliding a cup of tea toward her. "Sit, eat." Emily hesitated, but the warmth of the tea between her hands was enough to make her obey. She ate in silence, unsure why Daniel kept glancing at her, as though trying to find the right words. Finally, he spoke. "Emily, last night after you went to bed, I couldn't stop thinking about you and Lily, about everything you've been through." His voice was careful, like he was stepping on glass. "I need to ask you something, but I don't want you to feel pressured." Emily froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. "What is it?" she asked. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes intense. If I offered to help you, not just tonight, not just a warm bed for a few days, but really help you, would you let me? Her heartbeat picked up. She didn't know what he meant. Money? A job? Something else? But she knew she couldn't just accept kindness without questioning it. Why? She asked softly. Daniel's gaze softened. Because I've been where you are, Emily. Not exactly the same, but I know what it's like to be overlooked. To feel like the world decided you weren't worth saving. Emily's throat tightened. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to believe him. But trust was a luxury she hadn't been able to afford for years. Before she could answer, Lily toddled into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. She climbed onto Emily's lap, and Daniel's eyes followed her every movement, gentle, protective. Just think about it, Daniel said quietly. I'm not going anywhere. But Emily knew that if she said yes, everything in her life would change. And change, no matter how good, was terrifying. The dinner ended on a warm note. Laughter still echoed faintly in the hall. But when Emily tried leaving, Damien stopped her gently, his hand brushing hers briefly. Stay a moment, he said softly. The butler discreetly left the room. Emily looked at him nervously, unsure what he wanted to discuss. She didn't like feeling indebted. Damien leaned forward, serious now. You don't have to explain, he began, but I'd like to help. Emily shook her head quickly. You've done enough already. Her voice carried quiet stubbornness. But Damien wasn't backing down. I don't think I've done enough. You've been working yourself sick, sleeping on a hard floor. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. I manage, she replied quietly. He tilted his head slightly. Had she been living in a lie? That evening, Daniel arrived home early. His mood was unreadable. Isla confronted him, hands trembling but voice steady. Is it true? What they said about the charity? Daniel froze. For the first time, his perfect composure cracked. Who told you that? He asked quietly. Her heart sank at his tone. Cold, almost dangerous. The warmth she had known was gone in an instant. I just want the truth, Daniel, she whispered. Because right now, I don't know who you really are. He stepped closer, his jaw tight. You think you can judge me? Based on one article? You have no idea what I've done to keep my world intact. There was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before, a flicker of desperation, and maybe fear. Before either of them could say more, Daniel's phone rang. He answered quickly, his voice low. When he hung up, he looked at Isla, expression grave. Pack your things. We're leaving tonight. Her breath caught. Why? His reply was like ice. Because someone is coming, who wants to destroy us both. The next morning, Sophie woke up earlier than usual. The faint golden light of dawn streamed through the hotel window, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel the heavy weight of dread pressing on her chest. She still had no idea what the future would hold, but something deep inside told her she wasn't alone anymore. When she stepped out into the hallway, she saw Liam already waiting near the elevator holding 2 cups of coffee. He smiled warmly when he saw her. Thought you might need this, he said, handing her the cup. We've got a busy day ahead. Sophie hesitated. What kind of busy? Liam grinned mischievously. The kind where you're going to see exactly what you're capable of. They headed to one of his offices, though this time, Sophie noticed it wasn't the gleaming skyscraper from yesterday. This building was more modest, located in an older part of town. Inside, dozens of people bustled about, sorting papers, answering phones, and helping visitors in a long waiting area. What is this place? Sophie asked, wide-eyed. Liam's expression softened. This is one of the community centers I fund. We help people who've fallen on hard times, job training, housing assistance, medical support. This is where I want you to start. Me? Sophie's voice cracked. I don't know anything about this kind of work. You know what it's like to struggle? Liam said gently. That's more valuable than any degree. Sophie swallowed hard, emotions threatening to spill over. For so long, she had been the one in need. The thought of helping others, people, just like she had been, felt both terrifying and powerful. Her first task was simple. Help a mother fill out housing paperwork. Sophie listened to her story, guided her through the forms, and offered small reassurances. By the end, the woman squeezed Sophie's hand with tears in her eyes. "You don't know how much this means to me," the woman whispered. Something shifted in Sophie's heart. She realized Liam wasn't just giving her a job, he was giving her purpose. At lunch, they sat in the break room eating sandwiches wrapped in brown paper. "You're a natural," Liam said. "I don't know about that," Sophie replied with a shy smile. "But it feels good. Better than I've felt in a long time." "That's the point," Liam said. "You're not here because I want to do something nice for you. You're here because you deserve the chance to change your life." Sophie blinked rapidly, trying not to cry. "Why me?" Liam looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "Because once, someone believed in me when I had nothing, and I promised myself I'd do the same for someone else." Sophie didn't respond, but deep down she knew this wasn't just charity. This was the start of something bigger. Tomorrow, she would step into that office again, ready for whatever came next. The sun dipped low, bathing the estate in a golden glow. Sophie sat in the courtyard, her hands wrapped around a mug of hot cocoa. The past weeks felt like a dream, one she was afraid to wake up from. The man who had once been just a stranger, with a kind smile, was now so much more than that. Ethan walked out, his footsteps soft against the stone. He carried something in his hand, a small wooden box, polished to perfection. Without a word, he sat beside her, his presence warm and grounding. "I was going to wait until tomorrow," he began, his voice low. "But some things shouldn't wait." Sophie's brow furrowed in curiosity. "What is it?" He placed the box in her hands. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the lid. Inside lay a delicate silver key attached to a chain, the metal gleaming in the fading light. "It's the key to this place," Ethan said simply. "Not just the house, but everything that comes with it. The gardens, the library, the kitchen where you bake those amazing cinnamon rolls. It's yours, Sophie. I want you to know this is your home. No conditions, no debts, just yours." Her lips parted in shock. "Ethan, But he shook his head. "Don't say you don't deserve it, you do. You've brought life back into these walls. You've reminded me what kindness looks like, what hope feels like. And I'm not letting you go back to sleeping on cold floors or wondering where your next meal will come from." Tears pooled in Sophie's eyes. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already have," he murmured. She closed the box and threw her arms around him, holding tight. For the first time in years, Sophie felt completely safe, like no storm could touch her here. Over the following days, the changes in Sophie's life were small, yet monumental. She decorated a sunlit corner of the house with flowers she picked herself. She filled the kitchen with the smell of fresh bread. She read books in the library until she fell asleep on the couch, waking to find a blanket draped over. One evening, as they stood together watching the first snowfall of the season, Sophie turned to him. "You didn't just give me a home," she said quietly. "You gave me a reason to believe again." Ethan's gaze lingered on her, full of unspoken emotion. "And you gave me a reason to live better." The snow kept falling, wrapping the world in white. Inside the warmth of their new home, two souls, once broken in different ways, found healing together. And though Sophie never forgot the nights she'd slept on cold floors, she knew those days were gone forever. Because sometimes kindness didn't just melt your heart, it rebuilt it.